Welcome to Leadership Development News, profiles and practices of top performers. I'm Dr. Raylene Nadler. Dr. Kathy Greenberg, my esteemed co-host, is with us today. And Kathy and I have been doing the show for 20 years, and we love interviewing folks, bring you tips, tools, things that you could use for yourself, tips, tools that maybe you're a leader that you could use for others. And we're big fans of emotional intelligence. We have a book, Kathy and I, of emotional brilliance and how to find that sweet spot of your strengths, your go-to, and what do you need to do when you're stressed? Because as we know, and as we've said, everything today is more. So whatever's going on, you put that little more sign in front of it. More anxiety, more impatience, more chaos, more pressure, more stress. And Gallup tells us that 75% of us need more help. Well, who do we need more help from? It's you, our audience, or you, the leader, or you, the parent in this situation. People want to lean on you and get some of that support. And so one of the things that we really like is what do you do with all these emotions? So between Kat and I, we have a lot of tools in our book, Emotional Brilliance, Kat on her own, myself on our own, but we like bringing these tools. And so we're just going to highlight one of them. What do you do with everything is more? Well, we have this acronym of what to do with emotions, NAME, NAME. So the N stands for notice and name. That's called affect labeling. And if you can just label what's going on, that's important. And the A is accept this emotion. Sometimes it may be embracing what doesn't feel good. The term comes up a lot of times, embrace the suck. I don't want to embrace this, doesn't feel good, but can you lean into that? That's one of the harder ones. And then the M is manage. What are you managing? You're managing your thoughts. And we're going to talk with our guest today and today about how she brings that to clients. How do you manage your thoughts? But you're not only managing your thoughts, you're managing actions. Is that mindfulness? Is that taking break? Is that well-being? What do you do? Manage your thoughts. What do you do? Manage your actions. And then the last is E, and that stands for express. Well, there's a lot going on. Do you write it in your journal? That may be for the E. Or do you have a confident partner, significant other, coworker that you can share what's important for you? You want to pick the right person because often we don't pick the right person. And then we share something and they don't give us the response that we want. So that's just one tool today. And we're going to hear more today from Susan Inouye. And the title of this is From Executive to Leader, Motivating from a Positional Authority, but not from positional authority, but how do you connect from deep trust, long-term profit and success? She's got a great background. And Kat, I'll bring you on and you can introduce us to Susan.
Sure. Happy to do it. And I apologize for not being on camera today, but I think everybody who's close to us knows that I had a pretty major surgery last week, and I am still recovering from home. And I'm delighted that I was able to make the show today. But with everyone's permission, I'm just going to give you my, I'll just say, usual voice. And we'll forget about anything else for today except maybe the face of our guests and you. And I think that that's really appropriate today because, I always love when we have people on our program who bring us a different perspective. And we have also, I think, made a really concerted effort to have more women on our show. And I think today, Susan is going to bring us not only a good, solid, and different perspective, but also bring us up to speed on some of the things that she's been doing since she published her book in 2018, Leadership's Perfect Storm, and some of the work that she's been doing with a practice that she co-created called Sawubona. And so let me just jump in here. So Susan Inouye is a brilliant person who is also bringing to us today some of the items, the issues, the realities of the challenges that many of us are still facing dealing with millennials and Gen Z. And I think this is still a very important conversation because these are the future leaders that we need now. Susan has worked at the intersection of profit, purpose, and presence, helping executives transform themselves into better leaders by transforming rising millennial and Gen Z talent into connected, accountable, and high performing teams. Her nearly 2 decades of work has helped executives, senior partners, and managers in financial and professional services, as well as technology firms, transform into leaders who motivate their people through connection and deep trust. Susan develops managers and high potential millennials and Gen Zs into engaged, accountable, high performing team members by drawing on her work with over 600 organizations in 40 different industries. Susan blends clear business metrics with human centered transformation that improves engagement, retention, and profit. Her approach has shaped many people. It started in South Central Los Angeles, where she experienced the power of gift centered mentoring and inner city youth and translated that into corporate cultures of belonging. Susan helps intellectually brilliant, relationally challenged leaders see the whole person, including themselves. The results are leaders who develop presence that empowers their people to navigate disruption, AI, and constant change with courage and grace. You can learn more about Susan at Susan Inouye. That's SUSAN at SUSANINOUYE.com. And Susan, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Relly. It's really a pleasure to be with both of you here today. And thanks for coming out and doing this, Kathy. I appreciate that.
My pleasure.
And Kat, we appreciate that. I mean, I didn't think you were going to make it, but you are such a trooper. I know you've been through a lot, and I feel for you. And thanks, I'm sure our avid listeners feel for you. So, Susan Inouye, we always start off with some of the key influences that you've had, who've kind of brought you to where you are today. So, who would you like to highlight?
Yeah. So there are many, but I think the two that have really impacted my life have been my great grandparents and my grandparents, and my husband, Tony LeRae. My great grandparents and grandparents, through the stories that were passed down to me, they taught me resilience, and they taught me the power of acceptance, surrender, and forgiveness. They were interned in the concentration camps of America during World War II. They had a thriving grocery business in Los Angeles, California, and they were really good, hardworking people and respected in their communities. So when an order came down that all Japanese, even if you were American, were going to be put behind barbed wire, they were a bit shocked. And because there wasn't a lot of protesting outside of the Japanese community, they had to come to accept what was happening to them. And in Japanese, we have a saying, shigata ganai, which means it cannot be helped. And so they accepted it. And they then had to surrender, which to them didn't mean giving up, it meant letting go. They had to let go of the life that they had known for so many years and had built. And their banks accounts were closed, but they had to give things away. I remember them, my great grandparents saying that they had stuff at the church, that they kept some valuables, but they had one suitcase that they could take. They were whisked away on trains with, I remember they tell me the windows had been covered so they couldn't see where they were going. And they ended up at Heart Mountain, Wyoming, in the desert, in this little box where they had these wood planks that had spaces in between. So during the summer and winters, it would blow in the sand, and it was like winters were frigid cold. So what ironic about all this, and I'm sharing this because the importance of acceptance, surrender, and forgiveness is something that I teach my leaders as well, becomes so important. A lot of these people had sons that had volunteered to fight for a country that was putting their parents behind these barbed wires. And when the war ended and they returned to Los Angeles, they went to get their valuables at the church and everything was ransacked. And so they had to start over their entire life. And the one thing in the stories that were passed down to me is there was great forgiveness for what the country had done to them, because they felt that if they got stuck in the anger that they felt, that they would not be able to move on with their lives. Right. And so some of the greatest lessons I learned were from my great-grandparents and my grandparents. And then the other person that's really changed my life is my husband, Tony Leray. Tony taught me the power of Sawubona, which is seeing and accepting people for who they are. And I met him because, gosh, 20 years ago, I was getting calls from executives complaining about this millennial generation. Like, Susan, who would quit their job without another one to go to? I mean, Susan, I had a kid come into my office. He said, how can I have your job in 5 years? And he had only been here for 6 months. And there was so much friction. There was so much disruption. I had to find a way to help my clients out. And that's when one day, one of my executive clients, he called me and said, Susan, I think I have your answer. And he took me, of all places, to the ghettos of South Central Los Angeles. He introduced me to Tony Leray, who was the founder and CEO of a nonprofit, Youth Mentoring Connection. I found out that Tony was a former CEO. He had sold a very successful business, and for the past decade had been saving and transforming the lives of thousands of inner city millennial youth through his mentoring program with unprecedented results. And what I loved about what he was doing was that he actually went into the community and he asked them what it would take to connect with them, to engage with them. And they told him. And that's when, over the years, he created what he called the gift-centered approach. And it was the heart of the way he led, which he called Sawubona Leadership, which Sawubona is Zulu for I see you, as in seeing the whole person. Mm-hmm. And he invited me to a mentoring session. I got to tell you something. When I went there, I was taken aback because here was a community of people of all different generations, genders, ethnic backgrounds, and the deep connection they had and the way they engaged each other that brought out the best in who they were. I said, oh my gosh, at the end of the evening, I said, Tony, I need to learn this. And so I saw a way of not only helping my leaders with their young people, but creating cultures of belonging. And so he did. I took into the corporate world over 13 years ago. And the difference was I started to turn around companies and cultures in a way that was more long-term and sustainable. And today, Sawubona Leadership and the gift-centered approach is in over 30 countries. And it was the subject of my book, Leadership's Perfect Storm, which we sold all over the world. So, yeah.
Well, that's such a beautiful story. You know, when we were talking about all of the accomplishments that you've been writing about and continuing to expand, we talked about these 600 companies in 40 industries in about 20 years. And many of the executives that you've worked with have been in the financial profession. How did you end up there doing executive coaching, and how did it become your niche?
Yeah. So I had a business friend of mine. I was executive coaching many of our clients, so she knew my work. And she said, Susan, I want to introduce you to the head of HR of a CPA firm. They look for good coaches to add to their stable of coaches, so that partners or people that are managers or directors have somewhere to turn to if they need a coach. But you have to go through this interview process, which I did. And so I met with the head of HR, and it was really interesting because as he asked me how I worked, and I told him the holistic way in which I worked, he kind of smiled and looked kind of puzzled. And he said, well, let me bring in one of the senior partners. They make the final decision. And so the senior partner came in and we talked. And all of a sudden, in the midst of me having conversation, he said, I want you as my coach. And I went, really? He goes, yeah. He said, Susan, I've had executive coaches. I know the impact they can have on leaders like me. And you take this to another level. And I went, whoa. So I became part of the stable of coaches, and it kind of blossomed from there. But what happened is that as people needed coaches, I was often picked. And I would ask my clients, well, why did you pick me? And most often they would say, number one, I felt really comfortable with you. Number two, you didn't try to sell me. You educated me in areas that I wasn't even aware of. And you backed it with neuroscience. And so I realized that I was offering a missing link for financial people who really had more hard skill, technical expertise. And I was offering that soft skills that they were not aware of. And so that became my niche because they needed something that I could offer them.
So that's really good. I think we have some more follow-up questions, about that. Kathy and I are coaches. We have a lot of people who are coaches, leaders, in our audience. And so we're going to go to a break in a minute, but I'd like to kind of hear more maybe when we come back. When you were interviewed and you talked about your coaching process, to hear more about what is your coaching process. You use the word holistic. Maybe we'll come back to that. But for our audience to kind of explain that could be very helpful. So you're listening to Leadership Development News. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News. We're having an engaging conversation with Susan Inouye. Susan, when we went to break, we were talking a little bit about the power of the Sawubona, this very powerful process that you've co-created, obviously, with Tony. Let's talk a little bit about what holistic really means to you when it comes to embracing coaching, and then maybe a couple of examples of how it works.
Yeah. So holistic for me is that it includes all of our bodies. So let me go here first, and then I'll give you a story and how we use it. So holistic, we have three centers of intelligence. We have the head, the heart, and the body. And most people, we are very cognitive society, so we tend to work from our intellect only. And that's what especially my financial and tech people know, because that's what they've been taught. And there are two other centers of intelligence backed by neuroscience, the intelligence of our heart and our body that has wisdom that the head does not. And so we tend to associate the head with thoughts and ideas. We associate the heart with emotions and feelings, although feelings are in every cell of our body, and the body with habits and patterns. And when we develop the intelligence of our heart through, I call practices of appreciation, when we develop the intelligence of our body through somatic practices, and we integrate all three, we have the capacity to do so much more because we're not coming from one, we're coming from all three. Now, where Sawubona falls in is that years ago, when I was being coached in this work and I was doing this emotional intelligence and somatic intelligence work, and I saw the power of it, I wanted a way to be able to talk to this about my clients in a way that they would be open. So Sawubona is about seeing the gifts in people. And at the time, there was a lot about strength finders. So people understood strengths, gifts. If I talked to them about gifts, the way to be able to see the gifts in people was through developing emotional and somatic intelligence. So maybe I can give you a story of one of my clients, and that would help.
Sure,
Yeah. Okay. So I'll give you a story of one of my financial clients since we're talking about finance. So let's see. I'll call her Samantha or Sam. She's actually in my book. She contacted me in 2010 during the downturn in the economy when banks had a sullied reputation. I don't know if you remember that, but she was the senior vice president and regional manager of a subsidiary of a large international bank. And her bosses told her, you have to be patient. We just got to get through this. There's nothing we can do. But she felt that there was something that can be done. And she said, Susan, if even we can increase our region's book of business by a little bit, that would be better than nothing. And so I knew what her goal was and what she wanted to do. And I said to her, Sam, I said, increasing your book of business is a byproduct of many things that you can't control. But what you can control is within you. And that's becoming a better person, and it's becoming a better leader. And at the time, I know she didn't understand how that had anything to do with increasing her book of business. But she threw up her hands and she said, what do I have to lose? So we entered through Sawubona, the portal of gifts. She sent out an email that I had given to her to 5 people that she trusted, that knew her and would be honest with her. And it revealed to her what her gifts were. And many executives of mine don't really know their gifts. I mean, because gifts are what we do naturally well. It's what we don't think about them. It's just who we are. So as she got back, she saw, oh my gosh, yes, these are my gifts. I'm analytical. I'm financially savvy. I'm good with numbers. I am driven and determined. I have high standards. And there was another gift that stood out that really touched her, was that she had compassion for others. And she realized that she was blocking this gift with her high standards, with her right, wrong judgments. And she needed to get back to that. Mm. And so in order for us to reignite that compassion within her, we had to, now this is where all the holistic stuff comes in. We had to quiet her mind because her mind was always racing with thoughts. And you can't develop the intelligence of the heart and the body if the mind is so overwhelmingly speaking. So we quieted her mind. It allowed me to drop into her body and connect within herself so she could connect with others. And connection is how people feel when they're with you. This was so important because when I interviewed her people, the one thing they said is she doesn't listen. Her mind is always elsewhere. She sees the glass as half empty. She only talks to us when we do something wrong and we don't feel valued and seen for what we bring. And so now, as she started to connect with them, she was able to receive what it is that they were offering. And she said to me, Susan, I didn't know my people were so smart. I said, they started to feel that she was listening to them because she was. And as she listened to them, and we then developed her intelligence of her heart and tapped into that compassion, she started to see their gifts. And she started to praise their gifts, which made them feel even more valued and seen. She started to put them in areas where they could excel. And she knew what motivated and inspired them. Um, and it just kind of rippled out. So then what happened is that her team started to come together. They started to collaborate better together. And I could tell you more, but long story short, what happened is within a period of 6 months, they increased their book of business by 50%.
Wow.
Within a period of 12 months, they were at 150% of their goals. By the end of the year, they were the number one region in the entire bank. And I'll never forget when she called me one day because her BD officer, before I started working with her, told me that she was the worst leader he had ever worked for. And by the way, he said, you can tell her that. And I did. And she said, I didn't hire him. Okay. But at the end of the journey, I get this call from her and she's teary eyed and I go, what's going on? She said, you'll never believe what happened. I'll call him Jim. Jim, in a room full of my bosses, told them I was the best leader he had ever worked for, that I listened, that I valued them, that I allowed them to get the results they needed using their gifts and doing it in their way. And Susan, I didn't think that becoming a better person and leader would lead to all of this. Yeah. So that's what happened. And this was during the downturn in the economy, by the way.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. I mean, that is a really great example, great case study of looking at the whole person and looking at the gifts and even just that term gifts. I mean, we know a lot about uh, strengths, is another way of looking at gifts. There's a lot of assessments. One of the things that you said, I want to go a little deeper because I think for a lot of our leaders and is about the thoughts that they have, quieting the thoughts. I'm working with someone right now who basically has got so much pressure. And I think what happens for a lot of people is when they finally put their head on the pillow and they're about ready to go to sleep, when their body's going, sleep, 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 we need this, the mind takes off. And so, from a strategy standpoint, in this case, and I'm sure other cases, we talked about, managing thoughts, managing actions. How did you help this person and maybe in general, just the tactics of managing thoughts? Because we have them. Some of the literature says as much as, 50 or 60,000 thoughts. Majority of them are negative. So what strategies do you promote for that?
Yeah. So there are many things that I do, but the first thing that I do, there's a sitting practice, a really simple sitting practice that, and I ask my clients if they're open to meditation before I take them on, because if they're not, I usually don't take them on. And so this sitting practice is a very simple sitting practice that I learned from my coach years ago. I love it because it's about, as you close your eyes, you breathe through your heart. And the reason we breathe through our heart is to activate the heart. And as you have a thought, you say thinking, you let it go, you go back to engaging your senses, listening for sounds in the room. Now, I start my clients off with very short meditations, like 3 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them like guided meditations. And I literally send a recording of my guided meditation, which is 3 minutes. And so they're not there for a long time. Now, I do have clients. I had one executive of a big institution, a university, that I work with, and I sat her down and we closed her eyes and I just started it. And she popped up and she said, oh, I just can't do this. I can't do this. It's just too hard, And I said, okay, calm down, calm down. I said, let's do a walking meditation. So with her, I started walking and I had them slow down. Now, walking she could do because she was doing something, but I had her slow down and I said, when you have a thought, say thinking, let it go back to engaging your senses. What are you hearing? What are you smelling? What are you tasting? What are you feeling? And I walked with her the first time and she got a hang of it. It leads to other things too. I have walk and engage. It leads to walk and beauty. But what happens is I start very small and it's more of the consistency. And I also say, when they say, I'll do it every day, I say no, because if you fail, you'll stop. Right. So I want you to do it only maybe twice a week or 3 times, but let's be consistent in when we do it. Right. So I have them tell me what I found, Relly and Kathy, in my work is if I give them something that's outside of what they normally do in their routine, they won't do it. But what I do is I bring the practice into what they do in their lives. So they will do a meditation practice as they drive with their eyes open. They will do one when they eat, when they shower. I have all these things because I find out, you shower, you drive, you take a walk in the morning. And by the way, they actually do it because they're already doing it. I'll tell you a story of one of my CEOs and founders. I was trying to get him, I was offering to him to do just the walk meditation that I just explained. And every 2 weeks when we met, he said, well, I haven't quite gotten to it. Now, I don't get pissed. It's like, okay, I don't have expectations. I said, okay, you didn't do it. Let's figure out why. So finally, one day he called me and said, oh my gosh, Susan. I said, what? He said, now I understand. I usually walk in the morning and I plan my whole day. That's what he does. And I told him, don't plan your day. When you have a thought, say thinking, let it go back to engaging your senses. This was the first day that he actually did it. And when he went into the office, he said, I sat down at my desk and all of a sudden, all these innovative thoughts came to me. And in 5 minutes, I came up with the best process that I ever have. And I said to him, you know why? I said, because creativity lies in the space of letting go of certainties. When you let go of the thoughts, creative thoughts can flood in. But if you're always thinking, you can't be innovative and creative. And that's why your best thoughts come when you're in the shower.
I just want to jump in here for a second because there's a couple things I just want to clarify for the audience.
Sure.
The first one is some of us are active meditators. So I happen to be one of those people. I don't need quiet space within which to meditate. And I'm sure there are many other people who are listening who have the same experience. So some of us are active meditators, for example, when we're at the gym or when we're cooking or when we're doing things that put us in flow, that take our ability to manage our thoughts and put them in a place where they're suspended, but yet active. And that's important for people to understand. Okay, so everybody is a different type of meditator, and finding that sweet space with a coach who's looking at what's best for you is really important for someone. And that's a great example, Susan. The second thing I want to bring to focus is that many, many years of work have gone into the science of heart math. In fact, a dear friend of ours, Bruce Cryer, who's well known as the CEO of Heart Math for many, many years, I still work with to this day. And we know that there is a very strong science between how the heart and how our brain have to be in coherence in order for us to reach certain levels of creativity, certain levels of synchronicity that give us peak performance. So I want to make sure that the audience understands that there is a lot of science behind this. The third piece of that is something that Relly and I are very close to these days, and that is something called, I call it, it's my version of it, called the DNA of peak performance. And there are many assessments, but this one in particular, called Meet Yourself, is a very explicit, very scientific way of looking at our DNA. We can look at 54 measures of behavior, and we can see a person's gifts and talents, and we can see very clearly how those 54 genetic behavioral correlates are displayed as actual behaviors or talents with 28 competencies. And so a lot of these things that we're talking about in, I'll just say, the conversation of holistic approach have very hard science around it that we can taste, test, and operate within. And I just want to bring that to bear because many of our listeners are very good coaches, but they also want very fact-based and informational sciences with which to work. Not everybody has that gift to be able to put these things together instinctually or from a practice. They actually need the science behind it in order to work with it. So coming from a standpoint of using an instrument or an application like a heart math or a calm or any of the six the kinds of apps that are out there as one way to go about doing this and showing a person where these things are for that individual and how they work for them. Neurofeedback using things like Brain Coach LLC is another way to do that. So I just want to share with our audience ways that they can become better coaches by not only using the practices that you're offering, Susan, but also the mechanics of what exists out there that they can tangibly use and show and demonstrate to their client how these things can work.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree, Kathy, because my my one thing for me as a coach is I find out who the person is, and according to who they are, then I design a program around them. And you talk about heart math. I studied heart math for years out of New Ventures West. That's how I discovered all the work of the intelligence of the heart and stuff. And so I find that when I know a person's life and what they do, like I had one client that loved to dig holes on the weekend. And I was curious, and I talked to him, and I said to him, "This is your way of meditating, isn't it?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "When I'm digging holes in my garden and fixing up my garden, I don't think of anything." I said, "That's the practice we will do." And so it's finding something that resonates for everyone. And regarding neuroscience, this is how I also got into the financial and tech industry, because when I talked to them about the way I work, I could back it up with neuroscience of different things. And I absolutely agree that there are some things that are harder for people to do. So if we have apps and we have any kind of, things that allow them to be able to get to that space. My husband is one of those. He has to have a particular meditation thing that's in his ear in the morning. And it has certain brain wave sounds and stuff that helps him to get into that state of being present. So there's not one way, there's so many different ways.
I think
And
what
like you said, as a coach, we have to help them find that.
Yeah, I think what you're saying, Susan, is so good in the science of habits. They call this stacking. And so what are you already doing that now we're going to bring and pair this new one? So that was a beautiful explanation that you had. And then I'll just say a word before we take our break, about the neuroscience. We've talked about this. We've had Mark Waldman and other neuroscientists on, and you got the executive network, that's when the mind's just going crazy, solving problems. And then you got the default mode network where it's free flowing. often it free flows into worry, but also some of the salience network of really being in touch with what's going on right now. Sometimes they call that the emotional intelligence between the default mode network and the executive network. What has value? What's most important? And I love what you're saying of bringing people back into the present. And so that's where the mindfulness is. And some of that's the salience network of just being in the moment, what stands out, what's salient, and can be that bridge, and especially around the creativity, having some time that's unstructured to let the mind wander. Martin Seligman from positive psychology talks about the imagination network is what he's calling the default mode. So, it's really getting in touch with your thoughts. That's why we're asking more about that and having appropriate times where it can just wander, gardening, digging holes, walking, and bringing back into the now. So just to benchmark that. So
Yeah.
let's take a break, and you're listening to the Susan Inouye, and we'll be right back.
Welcome back to Leadership Development News. And Susan, you were talking about some of the practices that you've been really successful with. And in the book, Leadership's Perfect Storm, what millennials are teaching us about possibilities, passion, and purpose, you've gifted us with how you talk about the 5 leader shifts. Can you share some of those with us in the time that we have left?
Sure, absolutely. So the 5 leaderships, I'll go over them and then I'll go by them one by one. They are from control to connect and received. This is what we have to shift from conformity to see and accept, from expectations to intentions, from authority to authenticity, and from bottom line myopia to belonging. And if we look at from control to connect and receive, when we're talking about connection, we're not talking about communication or connectivity. We're talking about how a person feels when they're around you. And connect and receive, we have found, is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to anyone. Because when we connect with the person and are truly present and open and curious to receiving the thoughts, the ideas, what they have to offer, all of a sudden they feel heard, they feel seen, and they feel valued. And that kind of feeling multiplies tenfold for them. Receiving. Receptivity is a very overlooked trait of leadership. We are taught it's better to give than to receive. But building the body of a leader means building the body of someone who can receive thoughts and ideas with openness and curiosity, that can receive praise, that can receive criticism, that can receive help. Because when we do that, we give to someone else the opportunity to give to us and to use their gifts to help to support us. And that makes them feel like they are a part of the community or the organization that we are a part of. Then from conformity to see and accept. Most people, especially millennials, have a saying, one size does not fit all. Especially millennials, they want to feel that they're unique and not part of this mass herd. And so when you see and accept them for who they are, you create a safe space where they see and accept you for who you are, and a different conversation unfolds, not one where we are, I say, lecturing to each other with right, wrong judgments, but one where we're listening and learning from each other with openness and curiosity. And we talk about Sawubona starting with seeing the gifts as the entry point. Then there is from expectations to intentions. Expectations are our rules of how we think things should be done, how we think other people should do them. And when they are not met, we have a lot of pain. I expect, really, that if I give you training, you'll be able to do your job. And if you make a mistake, I have a lot of pain because expectations are not something we can control. However, intentions are our internal decisions of how we will look at situations, what we will do for ourselves. So there are things that we can control because they're within us. My intention is to help you be the best you can be by giving you training. And if you make mistakes, my intention is still to help you be the best you can be. So it opens it up to a conversation of learning and growth and development. And then there's from authority to authenticity. Millennials are the first generation that didn't have to go through authority to get information, and that is huge. So no longer can leaders use as a leverage point information over their people because their people can get the information sooner than they can. Right. And so this is why they don't respect people just because they have a title. What they do respect is authentic information, wisdom, experience that they can learn from as long as you don't lecture down to them. And they feel like they can talk to a CEO the same way that they talk to their coworkers, because that's being authentic and they can do it in a respectful way. And the last one, from bottom line myopia to belonging. We have found every generation wants to feel a part of something greater than themselves. They want to be able to feel that they're contributing in some way. Mm-hmm. And so when organizations create a culture that allows them to get the results that they need using their gifts and in their way, they're motivated to go beyond what's expected, to invest in themselves, the work, and the organization. And if you want any stories, I've got stories that kind of demonstrate those 5 leaderships, but I'll stop there.
Well, those are really great. I'm going to highlight some of them just because you went through those really fast. So competency to connect, mm-hmm. Conformity to kind of respect for where they're at. I mean, I have everyone here. Expectations to intent, authority to authenticity, bottom line myopia to belongingness. Those are really good. We talk about those a lot, and maybe the idea of intent, because expectations are so important. I just finished doing a supervision group with coaches, and often it comes into around communication and what's your intent. And I think the other piece from the neuroscience that we talk a lot about is that most of us are on autopilot. And I like to say, if you're stay on autopilot, you stay average. And so one of the keys then is really this idea of intent. And so maybe is there an example or story about expectations to intent, which really means getting off autopilot and probably thinking. And with AI, we like to say that we've outsourced our thinking. We don't even really think that much anymore because we're on autopilot. So what are strategies about the intent? And I know coaching is slow thinking, leadership is slow thinking, where maybe you can get in touch with intent. But any strategies that you help with that around this idea of expectations to intent?
I think part of it is, and I have several stories, but I think part of it is for leaders to become aware that sometimes expectations can get them into trouble. Because it's hard to convince them that you don't want to have expectations, because they'll say, no, I have to have expectations. I said, well, what if we have goals, right? What if we have a goal to do something rather than an expectation? But I'm thinking of this story of one of my clients, uh, and I'm trying to think of what I would call her. I'll call her Alice. So Alice was a leader. She's a marketing leader in a international firm that sells products globally all over the world. And she was having problems with her millennial, who I'll call Reagan. She said to me, Susan, Reagan keeps making all these mistakes. I have to keep cleaning up after her. And when she told me about all the expectations she had about Reagan, I said to her, gosh, how can Reagan meet all these expectations that you have? And she looked at me and she said, that's her job. You know, I said, oh, okay. So as I was in the beginning of the coaching with her, I said to her, look, I want you to keep noticing when you're telling Reagan what you need to do rather than asking her what she would think of doing and what her ideas. And as she did this self-observation, she noticed that, oh my gosh, I do order her around a lot. But it didn't stop her yet, okay? Until one day what happened was is that Reagan was head of production. They used to photograph all these products from around the world so that they could sell them online, right? And so Reagan was a production coordinator. She would get everything together and they would do a photo shoot. And so Alice gave her a list of the things that needed to be at this photo shoot. And she said, you need to check it 3 times so we don't forget anything. 3 times. And I heard this story from Reagan and some other people. So it's kind of interesting. Anyway, they get to the photo shoot and one of the products is missing. And Alice gets really upset. She goes, I told you to check it 3 times. And Reagan looked back at her and said, look, I checked it twice and everything that you put on the list is here. She said, oh. She goes, now we're going to have to create another photo shoot. We're going to spend more money. So what happened is that Reagan brought her the list that she had sent to her. And Alice looked at it and she said, oh my gosh, this one item is not on the list. It was the biggest awakening for her. She felt so embarrassed that she called me that day and she said, Susan, I now understand that I need to start letting go of my expectations, but I have a hard time letting go. And so what we started to work on for her, because she had this big aha moment, she says, I can't keep doing this, because she says, I can't even meet my own expectations, right? So I started giving her little practices of letting go. We noticed that she would correct people's mistakes. I said, every time you see a person's mistake, you have to stop. And part of this, at the same time, I was quieting her mind and doing some other things. But the process of letting go was letting go of little things like correcting people's mistakes, letting go of checking her emails when she was working on a project, letting go of answering her phone when it vibrates. Slowly but surely, we cracked open. So her body started getting used to the process of letting go, of releasing.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that's important in the work that I do is that we don't change unless we change the way we feel in our body,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that we can have insights like, I need to be patient. I was told I need to be patient. But unless we have practices that we do on a consistent basis, that we embody what it feels like to be patient, we never develop new habits that lead to our competency where we are patient and not just acting it. Slowly but surely, Alice started to let go and she started to see the gifts in Reagan. But it took many little things for her to be able to finally be at a point where she started to trust herself and trust others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I hear you saying, and I think in coaching we often do this, what do you need to stop doing, or what do you need to say no to? And some of those are big issues that can be their identity. And you started the story about surrender and acceptance and forgiveness.
Mm.
Before we kind of end here, any tips around acceptance? Because I talked about when we started with the name, notice, accept, manage, express. Acceptance is hard. Anything that you have noticed, and especially it sounds like from your, great grandparents,
Yeah.
strategy to help us accept that what we don't want to accept.
Well, I think part of acceptance is that I found out, like from my grandparents, is started with them, but it then filtered into the work that I do, is when we are present to see things as they are and not as we maybe wish they would be. And when we see a bigger picture, my grandparents saw a bigger picture of what this all should be.
Mm.
Then what happens is that bigger picture, or the greater good of what you go for, allows you to accept what happened in the moment. One of the things that I did learn from my grandparents regarding acceptance, surrender, and forgiveness is that they saw that when their children and grandchildren fought for them to get reparation, they said to us, do not act out of your anger.
Mm.
Act out of forgiveness and acceptance, because you will then do it not just for our people, but you'll do it for the greater good of mankind, in hopes that this will never happen again.
Yeah.
And so when you see a bigger picture, it's easier to accept what happened in the moment,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that we strive for.
Well, this has been a beautiful show today, and I just want to thank you, Susan, for being with us and sharing your amazing experiences and your cases to make them so real for our audience. They really appreciate that. And really, always such a pleasure to be with you on the show today and every day.
Well, thank you, Kat. We'll end now. So you've been listening to Leadership Development News. Continue to tune up your performance. Thank you.